Jeff, Jim, and Carmela, number 48. As I told you on the last reading of this novel, part number 48 is a first-person reading. Carmela is going to explain a lot of things that will clear up the story in her relationship with the two brothers, the two identical twin brothers, Jeff and Jim. I was going to try to find someone to read part 48, but I want to finish this up, so I'm going to use a computer voice. The computer has a difficult time saying Mehmet and bushwhackers, so when you hear that portion, you'll know what the computer voice is saying. Now, I could read it, but it should be read with a female voice. And this computer voice that I have is a female voice. So, this is part 48 of Jeff, Jim, and Carmela.
I could hardly believe I was going to see my husband Jeff for the first time, after the last time I saw him in Istanbul. That was when Jeff was assigned to a dangerous mission. Receiving the news that Jeff had been killed in this operation was one of the worst days of my life. And now he was alive, and on his way to see me at a cabin my other husband Jim had borrowed from one of his friends. I must admit my life with men has been out of the ordinary, and Jeff and Jim was one of those that was extraordinary. I have always considered any time you say no, and no is accepted, then that is final. If it goes past you not saying no, then neither man or woman should try to make it out to be something it is not. My first experience with this was in Japan during that photo shoot. Although the Japanese guy was a crook, I never said no. I had no way of knowing the guy was a crook, so I had to take part of the responsibility of what happened to me. In other words, I was a willing partner. That is probably the reason I recovered from that episode so fast, but Jeff was a big part of that. When I met Jeff, I guess it was me that instigated that affair with him, but Jeff did not say no. Jeff was authentic, and he was who he said he was. The first time when I met Jeff in Mamet's taxi, I was confident Jeff would fall in love with me. If that sounds egotistical, then so be it. I could have gotten into a similar Japanese situation with Jeff if he had been any other person than who he was. Then his twin brother Jim came into my life, and I was rescued again, but this time Jim would know me like no one else ever had. When Jim departed the cabin, I was not concerned that I would lose Jim. We had talked about this day so many times we could almost predict its outcome. It was early and I considered I had plenty of time to think before Jeff would arrive at the cabin. I was wearing a pair of faded jeans, and a baggy sweatshirt. Then I remembered the blue jersey dress Jeff had purchased for me. It was the same dress I purposely wore when I met Jim for the first time. It was Jeff's favorite, and I considered that dress a special part of me. I had not worn it again after that first meeting with Jim. As it happened, I had folded and placed it in one of those plastic bags where you suck the air out with a vacuum cleaner. It was small enough to fit in a small purse, but I had placed it into one of my overnight bags, and I had that bag with me at the cabin. I retrieved it from the bag, and removed the wrinkles. When I put the dress on, I was surprised it fit exactly the way it did when Jeff gave it to me. I washed my hair and took special care in using my makeup. When I looked at myself in the full-length mirror, I knew I was ready to meet Jeff again. After all, he was my husband. Jeff had once ordered me some very expensive perfume from some exotic place in Spain. I had never used it with Jim, but tonight I would wear it for Jeff. When I was ready, only then did I question what I was doing. What I was doing is the way it is, and I tried to convince myself it was no different than anyone else would do in a similar situation. I must admit it was one of the most exciting anticipations of my life. I was thinking Jim had me figured out when he started calling me by the pet name Gypsy. I was confident the brothers were 100% in love with me. I could not think of any other situation that would bring out the true me, and I wanted to think others would do, and be the same in a similar circumstance. All this thinking was me justifying anything that could happen tonight with Jeff. I began to think how I would react when Jeff arrived. It would be impossible to use the word no. I had decided it would be whatever Jeff wanted it to be because I was as close to him as I now was to Jim. I remember what Jim had told me about our life together. Jim had said he felt like he was living in a melodrama, and now I was convinced we were doing just that. When I heard the truck coming up the gravel driveway, I could hardly move and stand up. I walked over to the front door and opened it. Then I stepped back to a position where the fireplace would illuminate me just enough so Jeff could see me in the blue jersey dress when he faced the entrance to the cabin. I was completely into the moment, and was setting the stage for Jeff to see and remember me from those times we were together. My mind and body were in a dreamlike state, and I was not in control. Jeff walked up to the door and looked at me. I was also seeing Jim and Jeff at the same time, and I knew I was probably one of a few women to ever have an experience like this. Jeff walked through the door and stopped. Then he took the few remaining steps to me, and he placed his arms around me. My legs would not hold me anymore, so Jeff carried me over to the couch, holding me tighter than I had ever been held before. He said absolutely nothing, and I could feel his tears as they wet the front of my blue jersey dress. Never in my life had I seen someone weep to the point where their face was completely covered with tears. Then I realized some of that was my tears mingling with his. Jeff would kiss me, then he would touch me. At this point I cannot tell you how I felt, but I can tell you I had never felt this much love before, and I was responding to each touch. Responding is a mild word for how I was feeling. Time completely stopped for me, and I don't know how long Jeff continued to come back into my life. Finally, Jeff turned me loose and leaned back on the couch and began to speak. This is what he said. "Carmela, I love you as much as I have from the beginning of our life together. Each time I close my eyes I can see you standing at the curb at the Istanbul airport, and our first meeting in Mehmet's taxi. What I am about to tell you will clear everything up for you, and you will understand why I did what I did. The report about me being killed in action was a lie. It was all a made-up lie. The money and the house in Atlanta were not from MI7, it was from me. I would never have re-entered your life if you had not come back to Istanbul with Jim. This thing about the Russians and all the intrigue was orchestrated by me. I needed to get you and Jim out of Turkey so you could begin to live your life. Some of my friends in MI7, Russia, and Turkish intelligence including Mehmet conspired to pull this ruse off. I have set up a trust fund for you and Jim. My investments have made me a wealthy man, and I want to take care of you." When Jeff said the report about him being killed in action was a lie, it was like someone pouring ice water over me. But what Jeff was about to tell me next has given me a broken heart that would never completely mend, but my love for Jim helped me live with the memory of Jeff. Jeff said Omar and his men set up an ambush for the guys from the Turkish intelligence. I learned about this through an informant. The ambush was near the island where we stayed when we were married. The only way I could warn them was to commandeer a small boat and head in the direction they were to dock their boat. The only thing I could do is point the boat toward the dock and approach it at high speed. One of the ambushers saw me coming at high speed toward the dock, and without thinking fired a shot at me. Then the ambushes started firing on the Turks as well as me. The Turks momentarily thought I was the enemy, and they too fired on me. The Turks finally figured out what was happening, and returned fire on the ambushes. When one of the rounds hit me, I knew I was wounded severely. The Turkish Navy had a submarine in the area, and with reinforcements from the Turkish Navy they were able to kill most of Omar's people. The Turks took me aboard the submarine, and transported me to an American ship coming into the port of Istanbul. The doctors on the ship saved my life, but the bullet had done its damage. Carmela, the bullet that tore through my body, robbed me of my manhood. I will be this way for the rest of my life, and the doctors could not repair me. It is a fact I have decided to live with. but now you know why I wanted you to find and marry Jim. I wanted to notify you, and before I could, one of the men at headquarters in DC knew about Jim, and sent me a message telling me about me having an identical twin brother. You would think that a man who knew almost everything would have known about Jim. They wanted to know if they should contact Jim. That's when I decided to devise a way to bring you and Jim together. Please understand, if not for Jim I would probably have continued to try and have a life with you, Carmela. At the time I knew you would never find out about me, and my decision to make you think I was killed in action. I decided to have you think I was deceased. My plan was so complete I arranged to have your clock radio to start playing in the kitchen, knowing when you heard Jim it would set the plan in motion. When you and Jim came to Istanbul, it was important to keep you from finding out about me. Then people started confusing Jim with me, so I had to get you all out of the country. I devised a plan where you thought the Russians wanted to capture or use Jim. By this time, I had involved so many people in this plan it became impossible to keep everything from you. Lisa, who was working for her country's intelligence service, and a friend of mine reconnected with our friend Sophie, and they have a house in Jerusalem. They asked me to move in with them, and I have decided that is what I am going to do. I will always love you, Carmela, but our story has ended. You will never see or hear from me again. I have only one request to make of you. When either me, you, or Jim passes away, I request we be cremated, and when we are all gone, I have asked that our ashes be joined together, and placed in the Bosporus. Especially the location where it is just over 3,000 feet wide. Jeff and I stood on that North Carolina cabin porch, and when Jeff kissed me goodbye my heart split in two, and part of it went with him.